Those of you, okay, we're started. Again, welcome to Nutrition and Cancer. This is our 4-week series with Dr. Deanna Minich and brought to you by Harmony Hill. This evening's session is on keeping balanced weight. I'd like to say once again, we send our apologies for the technical snafu last week, but the session was recorded and is on our website for those of you who would like to review the Skinny on Fats. As I mentioned earlier, it was a really content-packed session. It was very, very interesting, so I highly recommend that you have take the time to do it. But if you don't have the time, the handout, the 6-page handout that's also on the website does a good summary of what we talked about last week. My name is Elaine Holland, and I'm Harmony Hill's Executive Director. For those not familiar with us, we're a nonprofit retreat center, which was founded over 25 years ago by Gretchen Shoddy, and we're located in Union, Washington, which is 2 hours west of Seattle on the Olympic Peninsula. Harmony Hill's mission is to transform the lives of those affected by cancer and to inspire healthy living for all. And at the heart of our mission, many of you on the session this evening may be familiar with it, but we do have a 3-day cancer retreat, which we offer once a month. And believe it or not, it's at no cost for those with cancer and their caregivers. In the month of August, our cancer retreat will be for families, which is the first time that we are bringing the entire family unit together. That's the person with cancer, their caregiver, and their children. Because one of our alums who's now on the board, her daughter came up to Gretchen a few years ago and said, "When do I get to come to a retreat? I need a retreat too." And she was about 8 years old at the time, and so she's going to be coming out to retreat with her mom and her dad. So please mark your calendars. Upcoming, we've got our 3rd annual Survivorship Fair on Saturday, August 25th. Topics are just wide-ranging, primarily focused on cancer prevention and wellness. This event includes lunch and is open to anyone with cancer, their caregivers, or anyone interested in wellness. The way Harmony Hill does fund our retreats and programs is through donations and earned income. And what I mean by that is our facilities are only closed for cancer retreats 3 days a month. The other 27 days, we rent out our beautiful 9 buildings on 12 acres overlooking Hood Canal and the Olympic Range for corporate retreats and meetings and family reunions, weddings, and other celebrations. So before I introduce Deanna, I'm going to tell you that at Harmony Hill, we believe that good nutrition is pivotal for cancer prevention, whether you're in treatment or out of treatment or just looking for a healthier lifestyle. And that's why Harmony Hill has been very passionate about supporting these evenings with Deanna, because we want to provide the resources to all of our constituents about nutrition. So now I'll introduce you to Dr. Deanna Minich. She probably needs no introduction in this 3rd week, but I do want to tell you she has over 20 years of experience in the fields of nutrition, wellness, and healing. Those of you who have followed and worked with her know she is very unique in her approach, bringing what could look like disparate disciplines together, whether it's science or spirituality or practicality and poetry and body and soul, but she does it all within the realm of eating. And what's fascinating is looking at our relationship with food as a domain for experiencing greater personal growth. She's got her PhD in nutrition, and again, if you're online with us this evening, you can use chat to bring up any questions as they come up. So with that, Dr. Deanna Minich, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Elaine. And I'd like to, again, give great big thanks to Harmony Hill Retreat Center for putting on this webinar series. They are very committed to healing and also to nutrition as it relates to cancer and wellness. So I feel very privileged to be a part of the Harmony Hill team, and I'm also so much a fan of Harmony Hill that I'm even getting married there in September. So that will be fun. It's a really beautiful place for all of you that may or may not have experienced it. It's really wonderful. So tonight
I didn't realize that, Deanna. Congratulations.
Oh, you didn't know that? Yeah.
No.
September 8th. We're spending the whole weekend there. It's a great place for a weekend wedding, especially for people that are coming from out of town and having the trails in the back, having the great view, having places for people to stay. It's just so, and then the food. How could we, not say anything about the food there? In fact, I was just there on Friday and I saw the kale growing like crazy in the garden. So I'm so excited to see that, of course. So it's a great place, very healing, very nourishing. So as Elaine mentioned, we are now in our third week, and tonight we have a jam-packed session as well, focusing on how to keep healthy body weight. And so body weight is really, we're going to cover a lot of ends of that spectrum. And as you know, many people are very concerned with being overweight or even obese, and we will definitely be addressing strategies for that. We will also be talking about healthy body composition overall. Case in point, you can have a person that looks very thin, but when you look inside at their muscle and fat, they could be classified as a fat person because they have a lot of fat relative to muscle. So it's a little bit tricky when we say, well, what is healthy body weight? And then, of course, I also talk about people that are concerned about losing too much body weight, especially as they go through chemotherapy and other types of treatments, and we'll talk about that a bit at the end. So lots of things to think about here. But let's focus on the issue at hand as it relates to increased body weight. As you can see here, this is the graphic from the Center for Disease Control. This was put out in 2010. And if I were to show you every year leading up to this year, you would see an eventual progression of greater and greater changes in body weight. So we're now seeing some states that have individuals with greater than or equal to 30% of the population in that state that are obese. And in fact, I think the numbers have climbed just a little bit. We're hovering at about 67% of individuals in the United States that is either overweight or obese. Now, when I'm teaching at the cancer retreats, typically I will show this body mass index chart, which I think has its benefits, and it can be instrumental as a teaching guide, but it also has some flaws. And this is what is used in a number of different studies, or even insurance companies use this to assess people's body mass index, looking at their height relative to their weight. So the way that you would read this, so let's just, if you go all the way to the far left, and let's just scroll all the way down to 5 foot 5 inches. And then let's just say that the individual is about 160 pounds. So then we would scroll over to about middle of, probably a little bit less than middle of the screen there, and you can see that that individual might fall into the category, if you look up on top, of being overweight. Now, here are the flaws of body mass index. So you can have a bodybuilder who maybe they are 6 feet tall and they weigh 250 pounds and they're sheer muscle. And when you scroll over, what you see is that they may be classified as obese. So anytime you are assessing your body mass index, please keep in mind that this is just a general guideline. This is used in the larger medical community and also research community. But again, it doesn't take into account the composition of the body mass. So these are the different classifications, looking at the different BMIs, as they're called. So typically normal is somewhere between 18.5 to 24.9, and it goes all the way over 50. But again, just note the disclaimer on using that. Sometimes I think it's just better to look at how people feel in their bodies, and looking at body shape, looking at where we put our fat on our bodies tends to be what we're finding a very important physiological of importance. So if we have it on the belly, if we are more of an apple type, so this is where we have more weight in the middle of our body and close to our organs, things like our liver and our stomach and our intestines, that this is more associated with things like metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. You have the pear type. Pear types usually have more weight in their hips and buttocks. And typically, this type, although it hasn't really been confirmed by a lot of science, what we tend to see with these types is more thyroid hormonal type of issues. And there are various physicians that talk about this type being more connected to toxicity and looking at the toxic effects of fat in our bodies. And again, that hasn't been scientifically proven. That's more anecdotal. And of course, much of this is also genetically predetermined, where we put our fat. For some people, however, our body shape can change while we are aging, and then we can start taking on a different body shape. So speaking to that concept of body composition, so here we have a woman who loses weight, and it's the same person on both sides, and we have two different versions of her. On the left side, we have a healthy version of her, where she has, if we were to take a biopsy and look at some fat sample from her abdomen, we might see healthy amounts of muscle relative to fat. Whereas she could also lose weight, but lose weight in such a way that she may increase her fat relative to the amount of muscle. So she may look exactly the same, but again, that's why it's so important to be looking at body composition parameters. So if you're wondering, well, how do I know how much fat and how much muscle I have? Typically, this is assessed through different technologies, through bioimpedance analysis. This is called BIA. Several practitioners use this type of metric in their office, and essentially an electrical current is generated through the body, a weak current, and it goes from fingertip down to ankle, and based on the conductance of that, they can determine the water content, looking at muscle, looking at fat. There are all other more sophisticated ways of doing this, like underwater weighing and DEXA and other types of more elaborate, more expensive methods. So those are some ways that you can find out about your body composition. So the key part here about why we would focus on fat tissue. I remember when I went to school years and years ago, I remember learning that essentially our fat tissue was just storage. It gave us a sense of protection, it protected our organs, but it was inert. It didn't do anything. Now what we know in this past 10 years is that it's much more than just an energy storage depot. The typical fat cell can release more than 30 different inflammatory messengers in the body. One fat cell can release more than 30 different inflammatory messengers. These are called adipokines. So this is some newer research. This is probably, again, it's come out in the past 5 to 10 years, how being overweight or being obese could mean that you are experiencing inflammation. And inflammation is really the bedrock of so many different chronic diseases. So it's extremely important to put the flame of inflammation out in the body so that we can stay healthy. Now, one other measure of looking at body composition is called waist and hip circumference. The very easiest way to do this is you take a tape measure, measuring generally at the waist at the narrowest point, but essentially that's about at the end of your ribs and right above your pelvic crest there, your iliac crest, somewhere in the middle of those two landmarks on your body. Because of course people are shaped differently, and they may not, just looking for the narrowest point may not be an accurate way. So basically, if you feel your lowest rib, and then you go to your iliac crest down towards your pelvis, somewhere between there is considered to be your waist. And then the hips is considered to be the widest point. And if you take the ratio of the waist over the hips, it gives the physician a lot of information. So if you calculate that, and what you really want is for women, you want 35 inches or less for the waist. And for men, you want 40 inches or less for the waist. So for men, as you can see here, if you calculate that ratio, there's no amount that is, no level that's really given for the hips per se. It's just looking at the ratio between those 2 points. So for men, as you can see here, that if we're looking at their health risk based on the waist to hip ratio, if it's equal to or less than 0.9 for men, or equal to or less than 0.8 for women, they're at a low risk. But you can see that the risk goes up with an increasing ratio. So what is this whole aspect? I mentioned this early on about overfed and undernourished. What does that mean exactly? This is a really key concept, and it really fits the apple obesity type shaped body very well, because this denotes that there are a number of different metabolic issues underlying that. And in fact, the body, you may actually feel more inclined to eat if you have insulin resistance, especially if your body is insulin resistant and it's not picking up the signal of insulin. So your cells remain undernourished. They don't get the energy. So we feel that constant push to eat more. Now, I mentioned this in the beginning with all of the different lifestyle habits that really do translate into changing our body composition. Everything from all the different diets to the huge portion sizes that we're served when we go out, to more fast food meals eaten outside of the home, not enough time to prepare foods, rushing. In fact, I had mentioned this briefly before, but skipping meals gives the body the message of starvation, that we need to store fat. So one of the things to do is to make sure that you are making time for some regular meals. Our soils are different. Our food supply has changed. We've got lots of stress, and we're relatively sedentary. So let's ask the question here, is obesity in our genes? You know, that question has been posed numerous times, and essentially, if we look over the course of the last 10,000 years, we see very few changes in genes or our gene sequences. What's very, very interesting is that the body composition of an individual can start in utero, can start in the womb. And what we see there is that, at least in this study that was reported in 2009, children born before and after maternal weight loss by bariatric surgery, children born after maternal weight loss have a lower risk for obesity than do their siblings born before that maternal weight loss. So many things are actually programmed in utero. Even our food preferences and our sense of food and reward can really be programmed at that time. It does not mean that we cannot overcome that, however. So what do you eat and what do you not eat for healthy body composition? Let's talk about that. And the way I want to break this down so that we can make it digestible is we're going to talk about the macronutrients, protein, carbohydrate, and fat. Those are kind of the three musketeers, as I call them. The micronutrients, which are the tens of different minerals and different vitamins that really contribute to changes in our physiology and are needed as cofactors for a number of our metabolic processes. I'm also going to talk about plant nutrients specifically that aren't protein, carbohydrate, and fat, and that aren't vitamins or minerals. And then I'm also going to talk, I think it's really important because many of us have the mentality that if we're having diet drinks, that we're losing weight, that we're helping our body to be in a healthy body composition state. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these synthetic sweeteners and additives in our food supply. So let's start off talking about protein, carbohydrate, and fat. The question of, I spoke, as Elaine mentioned, about the percentage of fat, trying to aim under 30% and not going too low, not going under 20%. But the question has been raised multiple times. In fact, it's a hot debate. So many different diet books are all trying to say that they have the holy grail of, you know, if you eat this way, this is the magic formula, and we need to have this percentage of protein, this percentage of carbs, and this amount of fat. So the question is, well, what does the science say? Do the ratios of macronutrients in our diets make a difference in our weight? Let me summarize for you. I actually did a lot of research on this, and I presented a lot of this to physicians back in March. And what we see, I'm not going to take you through all the different studies. I'm just going to give you the take-homes here. But essentially what we see from the evidence, it does not appear that the dietary composition of macronutrients changes the extent of weight loss over time. In fact, let me just comment there. There was a great study in one of the best medical journals known as JAMA, or the Journal of the American Medical Association. And they looked at the Atkins diet. They looked at the Ornish way of eating. They looked at Weight Watchers. They looked at a lot of different programs over the course of a year just to see if any of them had any different effects in weight loss. And what they showed is that essentially they all lost the same amount of weight. Now, there were little permutations in that study finding, but essentially, if we're just looking at sheer pounds of weight lost, it did not seem to impact the overarching amount of weight. What is key, however, what we do see in studies is that group counseling is associated with a degree of weight loss. So if you are involved in a group that is very supportive, where you can talk about your food and eating issues, what the studies show is that these individuals tend to fare better than people that do not get involved in group support. So that's really powerful, you know, the whole aspect of connection with the social network and how potent that can be on our behaviors. There's a wonderful book, and it's called Connectedness. I believe I mentioned this before. But it basically talks about how much of our behavior, even our ability to be happy, resides in the emotional networks that we have with other individuals. So it's probably not too surprising that we see an impact on weight as a parameter. Now, there's another key point here. Certain diets may, however, be better suited for an individual's preferences. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because if you like eating a certain way, chances are you're going to be more compliant, and you're going to be on that way of eating for a longer period of time than trying to do something that you really don't feel is good for your body, or you have some resistance, or it's just difficult for you to do. So being that the macronutrient composition doesn't make a huge difference, it might be more up to you to make those selections just based on good whole eating, right, rather than slicing and dicing, looking at all the different percentages. What they have found in studies is that in many cases, having low glycemic carbohydrates, so I'm going to talk about these. These are the carbohydrates that do not impact the blood sugar significantly relative to other foods. And also, for some individuals, eating more protein can be very beneficial. So if I'm thinking about people that are concerned with losing weight, what I would say here is that, again, getting the body into a healthy physiological state and eating a lot of these healthful foods, and maybe looking at calorie amounts, and definitely looking at that macronutrient percentage may play a role there. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to fats. So, and also I want to point out too that anytime you're looking at trying to lose weight, it should include more than just a diet. If you look at Dr. Dean Ornish's program, it's a very low-fat program, but he has so many other aspects to it that make it very interesting and he has a number of studies on his program, quite significant results. And basically implements a stress reduction program. He has meditation. I believe he does yoga. He has group visits. It's much, much more than just focusing on food. I think that's where we get ourselves into trouble, is when we just look at food as the magic bullet and not really look at activity, don't look at our social networks, and not really looking at our whole lifestyle. Okay, so does the amount of calories in our diets make a difference in our weight? Yes, it does. I'll just answer that question quickly. Those little calories do add up, so eating 3 jelly beans or 1 stick of gum per day, so this is a modest amount of calories, 10 to 12 calories, would lead to about 4,300 calories or an additional weight gain of about 1 pound in a year. So you might be thinking, well, it's so small, just a small amount of food that I'm having this day, but when we start to develop habits in these food ruts and we start eating that food every day, it can really stack up. So 3,500 calories is equivalent to 1 pound of fat, just so you have it in your mind. 3,500 calories is equivalent to 1 pound. So in this case, you'd have a little bit more than 1 pound of fat in one year's time. Drinking a can of cola at 139 calories would amount to 101,470 calories or 29 pounds over 2 years. So yeah, and here's just a very simple exercise, and I took this from Dr. Brian Wansing's book. He does this, it's very clever, it's kind of a rough estimate here, but if you eat 1 less candy bar each day, and let's just say it's 270 calories, if you just take off that last 0, you divide by 10, essentially you get 27 fewer pounds a year. 1 less 140 calorie soft drink each day, 14 fewer pounds a year. 1 less 420 calorie bagel or donut each day, 42 fewer pounds a year. So quite dramatic results from changing your calories. And you can think about that in the other way too. If you want to put on weight, increasing the calories would be the way to go. There's a difference though in the quality of calories. And of course you'd want to be choosing good healthy calories rather than things that are listed here, like the candy bar, soft drink, and bagel or donut. So what we've seen over time, over the last 30 years, is that children and adults have been increasing their daily energy intake. The black bar is the 1970s, the gray bar shows the 2000s. So you can clearly see that there's been a big jump in what we've been consuming. So let's just summarize this. So definitely, the amount of calories seems to have increased over the past decades. And I think that if you're trying to lose weight, it would be a wise thing to do with respect to reducing calories. And also we know from an aging perspective, and I've shown this study before, but primates that were calorie restricted by 15 to 20% aged much better than primates that were allowed to eat ad lib. So there's some talk in the scientific community about too many calories actually propagating aging. All right, so let's go into the different macronutrients, protein, carbohydrate, and fat. Let's start with protein. I'm sure you've heard lots of different studies on protein. Let me give you the takeaway here. Yes, protein should be a focus of a weight loss directed diet. And the reason why is because protein is really great for its role in satiety, in thermogenesis, and helping our body to create that sense of heat and burn fat. And also it helps us to preserve our muscle mass. So muscle, basically the building block of muscle is protein. And as we get older, we start to decline in our muscle mass. So getting protein is really important if you're trying to lose weight or if you're trying to put weight on and build up bulk. Now, people always ask the question, well, is it animal or vegetable proteins? Which one's better for weight loss? And really what I would say is that the data are not very strong here in terms of saying that animal protein is better than vegetable protein. I think as long as you have complete proteins or aim for a complex mixture of different proteins that you're getting in your diet, chances are that's very healthy. There is slightly more data to support the use of a dairy-derived protein, so whey protein. And many people say, well, I can't do dairy because I'm sensitive to it, I'm allergic to it, in which case, of course, you would not choose whey protein. However, there have been some nice indications that people that are sensitive to dairy might be able to tolerate whey protein. And whey protein helps to build muscle very well. It contains one of the amino acids that really triggers muscle growth. And it also may help with our immune system. So typically, I do like to recommend whey protein for individuals that can tolerate it because of its great science. Now, the danger in having a lot of these high-protein diets, so something like a severe Atkins type of an approach where you don't have a lot of plant foods, some of the effects there is that you could get the production of a lot of these nitrosamine type of substances in the gut, and these we know are cancer-causing. You can also get some acid-base alterations in the body, and what that means is that we get more acid in the body relative to alkaline foods. So of course, that's something to consider. And of course, the body does a great job of trying to buffer that. But if we're constantly giving the body all these animal foods that have a high net dietary acid load, as it's called, chances are it's just going to take more of our alkaline reserves, like our bone alkalizing material, like the calcium that we have in our bone, in order to blunt that. Also, when we cook protein together with carbohydrate and we get brown food, this brown food tends to upregulate or increase inflammation in our body. So when I say here increased intake of advanced glycation end products, that's a fancy word for basically saying increased intake of inflammatory messengers, so things that are going to increase inflammation. So if you like to eat more high-protein foods, what I would recommend here, if it were me, I would consider balancing that type of way of eating with leafy green, alkalizing plants, and also not cooking meats at high temperature so you don't get a lot of browning products. You don't get a lot of the formation of these carcinogens or even the glycation end products. All right, what about carbohydrate? So one of the most important concepts in carbohydrate is glycemic index. Glycemic index refers to the release of sugar into the bloodstream after eating a food. So something like, many times glycemic index is measured compared to table sugar or compared to white bread, which are fairly high sugar releasing foods, and they would have a high glycemic index. So what the studies show is that if we focus on low glycemic index foods, not getting that huge spike of blood sugar, we can help to balance our sense of satiety and appetite a little bit better. Okay, well, what about sweeteners? And as Elaine probably recalls from sitting in some of the cancer retreats, this is something I feel pretty passionate about. I think we eat way too much in the way of sweeteners, and many times it's masked in different ways in different products. So everything from agave nectar to sucrose to brown rice syrup, there are so many different names of sweeteners, and of course, they're not all the same. Some of them do vary somewhat. A large bulk of these, however, are processed by the body pretty similarly and have similar glycemic indices. There are some, however, that I think are better than others. So things like fruit juice concentrate, especially if it's apple juice concentrate. Wonderful choice for baking because it's low glycemic. Or you know, I know that agave nectar is appearing more in the literature and definitely getting a different reputation now, but really agave nectar, if you just look at it, it is a low glycemic sweetener. It's high in fructose, and so it's not going to blunt, or it's going to blunt any kind of sugar curve into the blood. So really when people say, well, what do you recommend? It depends so much on the individual and what they're looking for. I think that some of the sugar alcohols are good. The things that end in OL, like xylitol, sorbitol, erythritol, you can see that OL at the end. These are polyols. The only downside of those types of sweeteners is that they can give somebody or the symptom of diarrhea if there's too much of them in the food. So let's talk about high fructose corn syrup as well as sucrose. And high fructose corn syrup, which is now being known as, I believe, corn sugar. I'm not sure what the new term on that is, but in any case, just read the label very carefully. What you can see from this graph here is starting from 1970 and going on to 2006, we see a little bit of a decline in sucrose. And again, sucrose is just table sugar. And we see an increase in high fructose corn syrup. So you can see that going up quite dramatically and if you equate that to how many grams per day, 100 grams per day. So that's a lot. And sugar converts to fat in the body if it's not used for energy. So you can see at the bottom there, looking at the number of calories from the U.S. food availability, and you can see that the calories are definitely going up as I showed you before. And you can see how the sugars and the fats and how a number of these things are on the increase. So corn is in so many different products, and corn is used to make the high fructose corn syrup, as you can see, but it's also in other products that you may not recognize, like maltodextrin. And I think that the concern that people have with corn is that it's pretty starchy, and it can it can increase our glycemic impact of a meal. And also because many times the form of corn that we have in our food supply is genetically modified, people have some concerns about that as well. So I mentioned, I believe during the first webinar we talked about different documentaries, and even last time I spoke briefly about King Corn, which is a documentary talking about corn oil and how corn oil has made its way into so many different processed products. And that's one of the types of fats that we spoke about that tends to be a bit more inflammatory. Okay, so when we're eating lots of these soft drinks, what can happen is we can get more weight gain. It's not rocket science, it's pretty much common sense, but the physiological pathways are definitely there. Getting these liquid calories, high glycemic load, having high amounts of fructose, this can really change our body's physiology and set us up for things like metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. In fact, I really like this this table, this chart of this body and how soft drink impacts all these different systems. So changing our tooth enamel, changing our ability to have healthy kidneys and lungs and hearts and reproductive tracts. And osteoporosis, I think, is one of the bigger ones because, again, we're taking in a large amount of acid, phosphoric acid, which can really, just in a very general sense, rob calcium from our bones, and in order to blunt a lot of those acids coming in. And also at the bottom of the poster, they talk about obesity and increased risk of diabetes as well. So what about those artificial sugar substitutes? What do you think? What we know about them is that there's really some mixed evidence here. Some of them have been on the market for a really long time. I believe saccharin was taken off of the market at some point because of its concern as a carcinogen. And then you have some of the newer ones like sucralose, also known as Splenda, and that you can see on the lower left there. So Splenda basically looks like table sugar. It looks just like the molecule, the disaccharide just above that. But as you can see, the difference with Splenda is that it has 3 chlorine atoms attached. So it's not like sugar. It looks like sugar, but it's a chlorinated sugar. So let me just show you this. So this came out in 2010, looking again at trends of body mass indices, so looking at the increase in that number that I showed you, and also looking at consumption of products containing artificial sweeteners. And as you can see by that purple line at the top, these have just skyrocketed. People are consuming much more in the way of artificial sweeteners. We're getting more new products out there. And again, the general sense is that people believe that they might lose more weight if they're having these low sugar or sugar-free foods. So let me just show you some of the research that has been coming out. This is from Dr. Susan Swithers at Purdue, who did a study in animals showing that the rats that were getting artificially sweetened yogurt versus sugar-sweetened yogurt, just the regular sucrose, actually gained more weight and ate more food. So basically what they stated is that the consumption of artificially sweetened products may interfere with an automatic process, a sweet taste that might be a sign that calories are coming and I should prepare my body for the arrival of those calories. And when we don't give our body that sweetness, what can happen is changes in our metabolism. So I don't think we really understand what's happening per se with artificial sweeteners and how they're working in us mechanistically, but what we're seeing from at least the animal data is that these animals are gaining more weight. So this is her publication exactly, showing that there was a correlation between sweet taste and the caloric content of foods using artificial sweeteners in these rats. And in these animals, she showed that they had increased caloric intake. They actually ate more because of the artificial sweeteners. They're not reading labels and seeing that it's low in sugar, or that's why sometimes it's really great to do animal studies to see the impacts of these ingredients. So they also had increased body weight and increased fat tissue, as well as diminished caloric compensation. They weren't able to burn calories as well. So these synthetic sweeteners might be interfering with our normal physiological processes. I'm really glad to say that Harmony Hill does not have any artificial sweeteners on site. They are very conscious and carry only the good ones. So here's another one. Here's another article also showing that consumption of sweeteners resulted in significantly increased body weight. However, the food intake did not change. Isn't that curious? So it says these results question the effect of non-caloric artificial sweeteners on weight maintenance or body weight decrease. So what's the takeaway here? We're talking about carbohydrate. Well, it's really important to make sure that if you are eating substantial amounts of carbohydrate, making sure that they do not impact your blood sugar significantly. That's important for body composition, good healthy body composition. Even if you're wanting to gain weight, making sure that you get these low glycemic carbohydrates because they're healthier, as well as improving satiety and metabolic markers. Also, a reduction in sweetener consumption, all the different forms of sugar that are out there, might be helpful for reducing body weight long term. And as I mentioned, the association between body weight and artificial sweeteners, what I'm tending to see out there is anecdotally lots of people commenting on them. The science is still to come. There's already a rippling of different articles that are emerging, but again, it's always interesting because, you can ask the question, well, who does the studies, or, who funds the studies? And sometimes it's not always easy to get funding to look at different aspects of research. Okay, what about fat? We spoke a lot about fat already, so I'm not going to belabor fat too much here. But the takeaway that I really wanted you to have after the fat webinar was that it's quantity versus quality. We really need to look at both of these things. It's really important to look at the balance of the different ratios of the different fat that we're eating. Well, what we know about the intake, the typical consumption in the United States, is that overall we've been consuming a lot of everything, and dietary fat is one of those things. So these authors were suggesting that even small reductions in fat could help with lowering energy intake and reducing weight gain in the population. As you probably recall from the quiz at the end of the last webinar, fat contains the most calories per gram. So it has 9 calories per gram of fat. So another thing I wanted to mention is that a lot of high-fat meals can not be very good for our digestive tract, and in fact can create, as this article suggests, some stress in the body, especially with respect to how we respond from a cardiovascular perspective. So having high-fat ways of eating are not beneficial. Again, we want to be looking at the quality, the type of fat. It's interesting because we're seeing better body weight with monounsaturated fat. So the type of fat that you find in avocados, in olive oil, in even like canola oil, which we spoke about last time. In fact, I just made, you might be interested in this, I just made an avocado key lime pie yesterday. It was delicious, and it was just made with avocados, lime juice, and a nut crust. And I did, obviously you have to have some sweetener. I used a little bit of maple syrup to kind of bind it together for the middle. But it was really wonderful. And, you know, again, thinking of ways that we can get more of this monounsaturated fat. Typically what we see in studies is increased fat burning after a meal. And for people that are on this monounsaturated fat for 12 weeks or more, they typically do not gain excessive weight. So anyway, I think, again, it really comes down to the amount as well. And as it states here, greater body weight and fat loss was seen in men following a monounsaturated way of eating where they didn't restrict the amount that they were taking in when you compare that to a saturated fat diet. So saturated fat is definitely more of a weight promoting, and monounsaturated fat might be more of a weight neutralizing or weight reducing fat. I would say that, you know, there still needs to be some more science on that. I also spoke about coconut oil, and in fact Karen had a nice question about cooking with coconut oil. Coconut oil is high in what we call MCTs. This is a scientific term, medium chain triglycerides. Basically this means that the fats that are in the coconut are short and medium chain saturated fats. And what's really neat about these is that we're finding lots of good effects of these short and medium chain fats. In fact, they tend to be absorbed differently. They tend to go right to the liver, and many times they're already burned for energy by the intestinal cells. So they tend to have lots of these good effects. And in fact, even thinking about people that want to ensure good, healthy body composition and are concerned with putting on weight, I would definitely encourage things like coconut milk, things like coconut oil to help with, again, providing the calories, but providing a lot of the types of fats that will give your body accessible energy. So what we see is that these fats, very intriguingly, they increase the fat burning capability of your body, as well as reduce your food intake and beneficially alter body composition. Now, keep in mind that this study was looking more at individuals that were trying to lose weight. But in general, again, this would be a good, healthy fat source for individuals that are trying to put on weight as well. So this study was showing when you look at the long-chain fats and then replace those long-chain animal fats with these coconut medium-chain fats, you actually get a better effect on weight loss. One thing I mentioned in the fat webinar was that coconut oil is also being used now for individuals with dementia or cognitive decline. It seems that these ketones can provide an alternate fuel source to the brain for energy. So lots of good effects here. But again, you don't want to go overboard if you're trying to lose weight and start doing everything with coconut oil as well. So again, getting a variety of different oils, using coconut oil in a good healthy context is the way to do it. So takeaways on fat include that the quantity of dietary fat appears to play a role in obesity. So too much fat will make fat. Too much of anything will make fat. High dietary fat may cause inflammation in the gastrointestinal tract, and that can happen just within hours after a high-fat meal. And there are limited data showing that the quality of dietary fat may play a role in obesity. So thinking of the monounsaturated fat, thinking of the medium chain triglycerides from coconut, we're starting to see that more and more of the different types of dietary fat may have differing roles. What about minerals and micronutrients? Well, this actually comes from a study that looked at different diets and looked at the Atkins, the Zone, the Learn, the Ornish diet, and what they assessed is what do these individuals get in the way of fat-soluble vitamins, water-soluble vitamins like vitamin C and the B vitamins, and then minerals. Are these diets good to recommend because you're getting good levels of the different vitamins and minerals? And as you can see, the black bar on the left shows that the intake worsened, and the gray bar on the right shows that intake improved. So it's as you can see with Atkins here, very low levels of two B vitamins here, thiamine and folic acid. The Zone actually looks like it's a little bit more balanced in the way of providing a good, healthy balance of the different vitamins and minerals. Okay, so let's talk about vitamins a little bit. Essentially, there's been some discussion about dietary calcium and dairy foods and whether or not they can be helpful for weight loss. What I would tell you is if you start to see any claims around calcium and weight loss is that the studies essentially show that indeed calcium can be beneficial for helping with the metabolic processes, but you're not going to see weight loss unless you also have a calorie restriction. So you need to reduce some of the calories to see an effect of the calcium. You can't just see lots of calories, just be taking in all these calories and then take a calcium supplement and expect that to work. That's not what I'm seeing, at least in the science. We also see, now this just came out this year in January, this article in a nutrition journal that showed that calcium and vitamin D together is associated with less of that apple-type fat, less of the fat in the belly area in people that are overweight and obese. So it's kind of interesting to see that association. Phytonutrients, plant nutrients. I talk about this a lot when I'm doing the nutrition and cancer retreats. There are so many of these different, thousands in fact, of these different colorful compounds in food, and we just don't eat a lot of them. In fact, if you look at the amount of fruits and vegetables that we're eating, as it states here in 2009, about 68% of adults ate fruit less than 2 times a day, and about 74% ate vegetables less than 3 times per day. So I might ask the question, are we changing our body composition because we don't have these important phytonutrients from fruits and vegetables and whole grains? So as it states here, over the past decade, there has been a 2% decrease in fruit consumption and no change in the vegetable consumption. So we're not getting any better is what this is saying. So how do we improve? This study, I think that this is really very, very interesting. So let me just tell you without you having to look at all the numbers on the screen here, but they looked at healthy weight and overweight individuals and looked at what they ate. And of course, as you can imagine, the normal weight individuals had more in the way of fruits and vegetables than the overweight group did. And when you look in the blood to find a lot of these good healthy compounds, you find lower amounts of these things like carotenoids, which are found in yellow, green, orange, and red vegetables and fruits. So they're not getting as much phytochemicals, which is not a very good thing. And in fact, all these graphs, all this is showing you is that phytochemicals may be associated with inflammation. So with lower amounts of phytochemicals, we tend to see higher amounts of inflammatory markers in the body. What about bitter foods? Now, this is really interesting. We're finding in the literature now that you have taste receptors on your tongue, and of course you know that. That's where we taste. We have many different taste receptors for different types of tastes. But we're also learning is that what has been discovered by Dr. David Cummings at the University of Washington and others is that we may also be tasting in our gut. that we actually have taste receptors in our small intestine. And these taste receptors are especially tuned into bitter and sweet foods, or at least these compounds in foods. So you can imagine that if these bitter compounds are coming into the body and tickling these little receptors in the intestine, what can happen is a whole lot of different things here. And in fact, you can see down in the lower right all the different peptides that can be changed in the gut and change the function of the gut. You can change the motility, the movement of the small intestine, changing the gallbladder contraction, changing the way that the stomach empties, changing how the stomach secretes acid, and how the intestine and the pancreas are secreting the different enzymes to break down food as well. So there's something here about these bitter foods. And in fact, the reason why I'm bringing it up when I'm talking about healthy body weight is because they have found in studies that people taste bitter differently. So I might be a super taster, you might be a non-taster, there might be somebody else that might be something in between. And what they showed in this study, published in 2005, is that people that do not taste bitter tend to have higher BMIs or body weights compared to people that are super tasters. And also the body fatness is parallel with that as well. So the non-bitter tasters tend to have greater body fatness percent than people who are super tasters of bitter. And you might even know if you are a super taster. You might be somebody who actually doesn't like to eat vegetables because they just, especially the green vegetables, because they might taste too bitter. If you think about children, children don't like to eat vegetables, and typically they tend to have more sensitive receptors. So this may change as we get older in terms of changing the sensitivity of these receptors to the bitter compounds. So what are some bitter foods that we would have in our food supply? Things like green tea, things like soy isoflavones, which we have in things like edamame and soybeans. Caffeine, which I'm not a big advocate of, but it definitely is a bitter food that may change a lot of those parameters in the gut. And we know already that caffeinated beverages do change motility and some other things in the gut. Bitter melon, I love bitter melon. It definitely is very bitter. It looks like a wrinkled cucumber, and very, very much used in Asian medicine to make a soup out of it. So very, very bitter. And polyphenols are compounds that are found in plant foods. So what are the takeaways here? Well, what we know is that a lot of the popular diets that are out there may tend to lack essential amounts of micronutrients, so just be on the watch for that. Calcium and vitamin D may play a role in weight loss, especially when we combine them with reducing calories. In and of themselves, they don't seem to be responsible for helping people to shed pounds just in the presence of a high-calorie diet, but if we change the calories, we might change the effects on metabolism. And phytonutrients really do impact metabolism, and this whole thing with bitter foods, eating more bitter foods might be efficacious. I don't think we know yet, but it seems like they have a lot of good effects. Are there successful diets for weight loss? Well, as I was alluding to before, it's really more than just a diet, right? Many times having a diet plus activity is going to be much more effective at helping to lose weight than diet-only interventions. And it's also, you know, many times I don't even prefer to use the word diet because it just denotes something temporary. And I'd prefer to look at this as something that goes on and it becomes a way of life. So, you know, there may be different diets, and maybe they fit some people and not all, and we might spend a lifetime actually trying out all these different diets while our bodies are changing at the same time. All right, and I know that we're coming up short on time here, so I'm going to go a little bit faster, but I think I'll just take another, probably another 5 to 7 minutes to finish this information. So what are some specific foods you want to focus on if you are concerned And I would say, again, this goes for not just weight loss, but also just looking at putting on healthy body weight, eating more of these foods. So this would include things like legumes, things like beans, which are incredibly high in fiber, incredibly high in protein. And as we have been seeing throughout time, basically people are eating just too few in the way of beans. We definitely fall underneath the recommended intake, which is, I usually like to tell people really I don't put a limit on it, but at least 1/2 a cup serving a day. So 1/2 cup serving a day, and that's the very minimum. As you can see here, they recommend about 1/2 a cup per day. So there are lots of different nutrients in legumes, lots of the things that I pointed out here in green. So they're high in energy, they're high in protein, they're high in fiber, so that's good. And they can help with our body composition by giving us that fiber, giving us some good healthy starch for the bacteria in our gut to work on, good in protein, good in all these different phytochemicals. Now, I just mentioned the microbes in our gut. It's also thought that the microflora in our intestine has a lot to do with our body weight, and that by changing our gut microbes, we can really change our ability to lose weight. So that's where we talk about things like probiotics and even the fibers, which feed the good, healthy bacteria. These fibers, which are called prebiotics, pro-life, kind of supporting the life in the gut, they help to sustain the gut microflora so that we can have lots of good impacts on satiety and hunger and insulin in the body. What about water? You know, many times instead of being hungry, we're actually thirsty. And there have been some neat studies where they look at water consumption in people trying to lose weight. And for people that ensured that they had water, they had a better decline in weight over the 12 weeks compared with a group that did not have significant water preloads. And combined with a lower calorie diet, consuming 500 milliliters, this is quite a lot of water. This is about 16 ounces of water before each main meal leads to greater weight loss than a hypocaloric diet alone. So that might be because you're consuming less calories, you might feel more full. My only caution here is that I think it's better to load up on water 20 to 30 minutes before a meal, but when you're actually eating, you don't want to be diluting your stomach acid or a lot of the digestive enzymes that are released. So I think water with the meal is probably not as beneficial from a digestive perspective compared to water before the meal, like 20 to 30 minutes before the meal. So this just shows the curve and how the water group did a lot better in losing weight compared to the non-water group. Are there things that help us to burn fat better? Well, kind of depends. There are some things out there, things like caffeine, things like capsaicin, which you find in those red hot chili peppers. Different types of teas may also help with increasing energy expenditure and fat burning in the body. So this doesn't happen for everybody, and typically the amounts that you need aren't always achievable through just what you can get on a daily basis. But in general, green tea has a number of good effects. But what the studies show us is that probably it's much more about the caffeine when it comes to weight loss than it is about the other catechins and the other phytonutrients that are in the green tea. So I think green tea is wonderful. In fact, I do talk about it at the Cancer Retreat Center because it's got so many great studies on it being an anti-cancer type of substance. So I think from that perspective, it's great to have, and I just think it's worthwhile to not have as much in the way of caffeine if you can avoid it. Because again, it does change so many different things, so many different parameters in the body. So green tea with caffeine was what was shown to be more effective for body weight loss compared to green tea alone. But a lot of those bitter compounds in green tea, when you steep green tea for a long time, you may start changing some of those intestinal receptors. So capsaicin, which comes from those the peppers, in supplemental form, there was one study that basically showed about 10 milligrams of these actives can help to burn fat better. But I don't always think that that's the preferred way, especially because of, you know, it may not be good for the digestive tract to have large amounts of these. So, you know, if you decide to do something like that from a supplementation perspective, definitely check with your physician before embarking upon something like that. So just some other aspects to consider. You want to be looking at toxins in your environment. New data suggests that essentially toxins can be associated with increased body weight and changes in metabolism. There are lots of different toxins out there. There are lots of different food toxins, which is why it's so important to be reading your labels. So case in point, here's a little cartoon of the cow sitting on the couch saying, sure, I look contented, but the truth is I'm awash in hormones. So this really speaks to the whole issue of the hormones that are in our food supply, in our dairy products, and really trying to reduce those. So lots of different toxins are in the environment, and these are called endocrine disruptors. Fancy term, but essentially they start to change up a lot of our body's hormone function and a lot of the ability of the hormone receptors to work well. So they're in a lot of different products, a lot of different plastic products, consumer products, but also just in our environment, we can get things, just exposure to the air and to the water. I have, there are lots of different references for endocrine disruptors. In fact, there's a great handout, and in fact, I think I have it in the handout that we'll be giving out this time around, different websites to go to find out more about endocrine disruptors. In fact, these endocrine disruptors have been called obesogens, and that really, again, speaks to the role that they may have in promoting obesity. All right. In terms of the amount of how much we're eating, I mentioned this in the first talk, talking about how we eat and how that's really important. Keep in mind that it takes your body about 20 minutes to feel full. So on average, it takes 11 minutes to eat at a fast food restaurant, 13 minutes at a workplace cafeteria, and 28 minutes at a moderately priced restaurant. And when we eat with more people, we eat about twice as long. So, you know, there's kind of a fine line there. You don't want to be hanging around eating so long that you end up eating more, but you want to allow enough time so that you are signaling to the brain that you're getting full. Eating slowly led to decreases in energy intake within meals in healthy people. So eating slowly is really important. Mindfulness has lots of powerful effects. And mindfulness just means that you're aware, you're attentive to your body, to your thoughts in a meal. And in fact, it was found to be associated with decreases in weight, decreases in binge eating, depression, and stress, and even inflammation. As this study suggests, it helps to reduce binge eating and also helps to stabilize mood and reduce anxiety and depression. Emotional eating, I think, Elaine, probably we should do a whole seminar on emotional eating at some point, but when we're eating emotionally, typically we tend to overeat. So what we really want to aim for is focusing on when our body is really hungry, tapping into physical hunger rather than emotional eating. Stress eating, sometimes that can lead us to putting on weight. When we are stressed, we have higher amounts of cortisol in our blood, and this can really lead to a lot of changes with insulin function and lead to changes that might look more along the lines of metabolic syndrome and even progressing on to type 2 diabetes. Dieting tends to stress people, so you definitely don't want to put yourself in a state of deprivation. In fact, it just many times propagates cravings, further cravings for the foods that you don't think that you can have. Stress in general, as it states here, may be associated with a stronger drive to eat, and as these authors suggest, may be one factor promoting excessive weight gain. So if you're concerned with losing too much weight or gaining too much weight, stress, transformation, and management is the way to go, definitely. And what we're seeing is that people typically when they're stressed, either they don't eat or they eat foods that are high in sugar and fat. So relaxation is really important, getting those stress levels under control. And then finally, just to close with when you eat. When you eat is very important, and the more frequent we eat, small meals, not very large, just small snacks throughout the day, that helps to stabilize our blood sugar. So as it states here in this journal, eating frequency is higher in weight loss maintainers and normal weight individuals than in overweight individuals. Okay, so getting 3 meals and 2 snacks per day may be important in weight loss maintenance. More fast food meals and fewer breakfast meals are associated with greater body weight. There's a whole idea of nibbling versus gorging. I told you this is going to be an information-packed seminar, didn't I? There's so much here I really want to impart to you, but I know that we need to come to a close here. So I'm just going to say, again, the nibbling versus gorging, I speak about that in the cancer retreats. Basically, these small nibbles throughout the day versus the 3 big meals tends to produce better blood glucose, serum insulin, and blood fats in individuals. And in fact, snacking is associated with reduced risk of overweight and reduced abdominal obesity in teens. Watch out for nighttime eating. This is the latest syndrome. It's called nighttime eating syndrome. Can lead to increased calorie intake. And I just quickly wanted to put in here too, Elaine had asked me to do this, in terms of cancer treatment, thinking about lots of weight loss. I want to be sure that I tried to sprinkle throughout this seminar, this webinar in particular, some tips. But high protein smoothies are wonderful and often very tolerable, typically whey-based. Probiotics to really help with good, healthy body composition, staying hydrated, and then in terms of getting your appetite back, using extra seasonings, spices, and flavorings to help improve the food, and eating some of the soft, moist foods like the smoothies that I mentioned, and also bananas, brown rice, yams, and avoiding hard foods like crackers and cereals. I think it's really important to aim for those small, frequent meals and snacks every 1 to 2 hours. Even if you can't eat a lot, eating frequently, getting those calories in, I think is important. If you developed a distaste for fat foods, you can try some of the higher protein, low-fat foods like yogurt and cottage cheese, eggs, and lean meats. And dried fruits, fruit, vegetable juice. Juices have a lot of calories, actually. So that will give you much in the way of bringing in a huge, well, not a lot relative to some other foods, but definitely will help, and you can include those into smoothies. Fatigue during treatment, making sure that you get enough calories is really going to be important for ensuring that you can reduce your fatigue, making sure that you get enough protein, getting enough of the vitamins and minerals, and making sure to stay hydrated. I mentioned the coconut products. I think that those are really nice, especially even the coconut water, which is higher in electrolytes than just some of the other water-type products on the market. And typically I say to avoid sweets because all that sugar can also depress the immune system and make you more tired in the end. And then nausea, vomiting, kind of a side topic here, but sipping fluids before and during your chemotherapy treatment, eating a light meal before chemo, especially considering foods that are easy to digest like soups, and taking liquids in the form of ice chips or frozen juice chips. You may also want to try plastic utensils if you have a metallic taste in your mouth. serving foods at room temperature, and flavoring foods with, we spoke about spices, and I hope to do a whole webinar on spices eventually to help you use those very creatively. So let's summarize. Number one, nutrition is one of the many factors that plays a role in an individual's ability to lose weight, definitely, but it's not nutrition alone. When we're looking at the obesity crisis, it's really looking at a mismatch between our genes and the environment. When we look at protein, carbohydrate, and fat, the actual percentage might not be as important as the total amount of calories that we're taking in. But still, there might be some individual preferences based on what the individual is dealing with specifically, if it's metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes. Food composition with respect to micronutrients, vitamins, and phytonutrients is essential to consider. We talked about calcium. We talked about vitamins and phytonutrients, of course. Toxins. Toxins in the environment can lead to changes in metabolism. Environmental cues. If we have big plates, chances are we're going to eat more. So if you're concerned about the number of calories that you're taking in, making sure to look at what's in your environment. Emotions and stress play a significant role in the amount of foods that are eaten. Mindfulness and relaxation are very important for promoting healthy body composition overall. Doesn't matter if you're trying to gain weight or lose weight. Being relaxed and putting your body in a healthful state is much better. Eating frequency should be considered as well. So as many of you know, I have a number of different books. I've got a Facebook page with lots of different tips. And thank you very much for staying on the line. It was a little bit of a longer call today, but just wanted to be sure that you had all the information I had on helping your body weight to be healthy.
Great. Thank you, Deanna. I think my mic is still on. I just want to say thank you on behalf of everyone who called in tonight. Next week's session is pulling it all together, making meals meaningful, which sounds fantastic. And Deanna, I do want to say I heard you promise 2 webinars on emotional eating and spices, so we'll hold you to that because these are very. These are very popular. We track the number of people who look at the sessions in between, and it's getting a lot of interest from our people who visit our website. So thank you again, and everybody, we'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday at 6.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.